In the quaint town of Orlando, Florida, a chilling mystery unfolded when Carla Larson vanished during her lunch break, casting a dark shadow over her family and the entire community. The events spiraled rapidly, seizing the attention of the local residents. The question on everyone's mind was, who would dare abduct a woman in broad daylight? How could such a crime occur, and would it happen again? Law enforcement initially had few leads, until a woman's phone call changed everything. She reported that her husband had been acting erratically, offering a glimmer of hope in the perplexing investigation. Nestled near the heart of Orlando, Florida, lies the quaint district of College Park, a timeless haven for visitors. The area boasts a collection of historic buildings, inviting golf courses, diverse restaurants, and unique shops, all lining a charming main street. Home to a thriving middle class and numerous young families, College Park exudes a welcoming atmosphere. Its streets, many named after prestigious universities like Princeton, Yale, and Harvard, add a touch of academic charm. Here, residents stroll leisurely with their dogs in the evenings, engaging in friendly conversations from the porches of their homes. This idyllic setting attracts people from around the globe, and Jim and Carla Larson were no exception. Having settled in Orlando after Carl's transfer to Florida, they soon discovered Carla was expecting. An engineer by trade, Carla was thrilled when her firm offered her a project back in Orlando, a new theme park. The couple found a small house on Preston Court and settled in. Carla quickly impressed Cindy Garrison, the project's accountant at the construction firm. Cindy noted how Carla's smile seemed to light up every room, yet she possessed an unwavering resolve and dependability. A true professional, Carla took on the design of a massive hotel complex in one of the resort areas. She oversaw 3 different aspects of the project: a sprawling complex consisting of 30 buildings and a pool area spanning roughly 4 football fields. Despite the intense workload, Carla masterfully balanced her career and family life. She typically worked 8 to 10 hours a day, dedicating the rest of her time to her family. Her colleagues thought of her as lovely to work with. Jim found employment at a local hardware store, and 6 months after their move, the Larsons welcomed their daughter Jessica into the world. Carla loved being a mom. She finally had everything she had ever wanted: a fulfilling job, a beautiful child, and a home of her own. She had crafted her ideal life. However, during the summer of 1997, Carla's perfect world took a tragic turn. Tuesday, June 10th, 1997, began as a normal day for the Larson family. Jim woke up first, ate breakfast, got ready for work, and left. Carla then fed their daughter, dropped her off at daycare, and headed to her own job. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, she arrived, set up her workstation, and worked diligently in her office until lunchtime. Carla decided to grab a bite to eat and told her colleagues that she would also pick up supplies for a meeting scheduled for later that day. She inquired about the nearest store and set off to find it. As she left, Carla told her colleague, "See you soon," but she was never seen again. 2.5 hours later, Carla was expected at the meeting, but she didn't show up. Cindy, a client, called to ask if Carla was there. Cindy said she was not and expressed that it was strange, as Carla was never late. Minutes turned into hours, but Carla never appeared. By 4:30, Cindy and her colleagues were increasingly worried. Cindy even called Jim to inform him of the situation. Jim immediately left his workplace, picked up their daughter from daycare, and took her home. As Jim was putting Jessica to bed and waiting, he couldn't bear it any longer and called the police around 7 in the evening. Orange County Sheriff's Deputy Tom Woodard was on patrol when he received the call about Jim's missing person report. He stated that most missing person reports are not crime-related, so initially he didn't take the case too seriously. However, within 15 minutes, he arrived at the Larsons' home, and something about Jim's behavior immediately struck him as odd. Tom later recounted that Jim was excessively worried, inconsolable, and more distraught than people typically are when filing such reports. The sheriff's deputy looked around the house, but didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. As the conversation progressed, Jim seemed increasingly distressed. Tom asked if he had called Carla's parents or family, but Jim hesitated, clearly reluctant to do so. As the sheriff's deputy continued to ask questions, Jim suddenly blurted out, "My wife isn't coming back. It's happening again. This isn't the first time." The statement was completely unexpected, and doubt crept into Woodard's mind. He pondered what could have happened, wondering if Carla had left him again, or if he had killed her. After all, those who commit murder often report it themselves to mislead the police. At that moment, the sheriff's deputy grew concerned, thinking that he might be alone with a murderer and possibly in danger. On June 10, 1997, tourists were enjoying their day at Orlando's theme parks, unaware of the tragedy unfolding nearby. Local resident Carla Larson failed to show up for her meeting with an important client. Her absence was odd and completely out of character. When Carla didn't appear, her colleagues knew that something bad had happened to her. Jim, the woman's husband, had immediately filed a missing persons report with the police, but his behavior raised the sheriff's deputy's suspicions. Jim declared that his wife wouldn't be coming back. When Tom Woodard asked him to explain what that meant, Jim unfolded a tragic story. It turned out that Jim's sister, Sonia Larson, had been murdered by Danny Rolling. Danny Rolling, one of the most terrifying serial killers in Florida's history, had instilled fear in everyone in the state. It was a truly horrifying time. During the summer of '94, Danny Rolling murdered 5 students in 4 days. Jim's 18-year-old sister, Sonia, and her roommate, Christina Powell, were among the first victims. Although Danny Rolling had been convicted and executed long ago, how could all of this affect Jim? The man explained that he had received a call from his sister saying, "Something terrible has happened to Sonia. Come home." She had informed him that Sonia was dead. Jim said that his sister's death had traumatized him deeply, and now he felt that Carla was also in trouble. Jim did not expect anything good. He had never come to terms with his sister's death and knew that mothers with young children simply don't vanish into thin air. Tom Woodard immediately contacted his lieutenant, saying that this missing person report was unusual and they needed to involve the homicide department. Veteran Orange County Police Detective John Leonard took charge of the case. He mentioned that it was rare for a mother to abandon her small child like that. In this particular case, they understood that they needed to act quickly. While questioning Jim, Leonard also noticed that strange behaviors. The man quickly began to assume the worst, which was suspicious. However, his sister had been the victim of a murder, so that had to be taken into consideration. Initially, the detectives harbored suspicions that Jim might be involved in his wife's disappearance. Spouses are often the primary focus of initial investigations. Jim, however, claimed to be unconcerned, stating he simply wanted the police to prioritize finding Carla. For the moment, the detectives had exhausted their questions for Jim. They contacted Carla's bank and requested her credit card balance. It was revealed that Carla had made a purchase at a grocery store around 12:15 p.m. The detectives hoped the cards had been used after her disappearance, which could potentially offer a lead. Unfortunately, their hopes were dashed. No further transactions were recorded. After that grocery store visit, Carla seemed to vanish. By the next morning, she was still missing. Detective Leonard visited the construction site where Carla worked, gathering insights from her colleagues. One of the foremen mentioned that he had been driving behind her on the highway. She turned right in the direction of the grocery store. But a surprise awaited the detectives when several workers mentioned something they had seen an hour later. Returning from lunch, they had spotted a car resembling Carla's emerging from a wooded area. This forest was located between the store and the construction site. What was Carla doing in the forest, and why was she speeding back onto the road after lunch? Colleagues and friends offered a crucial detail. A man was seen driving Carla's car. They glimpsed him speeding away from the woods, visibly agitated. According to them, he was a Caucasian male, around 30 years old, with a dark hair and an average build. He was noticeably tanned and somewhat large. If this information held true, then Jim wasn't the one behind the wheel. Carla's colleagues assisted the police in creating a composite sketch of the man, and it didn't resemble Jim in the slightest. Despite this discrepancy, he remained a suspect, his seemingly quick acceptance of the situation raising eyebrows. The composite sketch and a description of Carla's car, complete with its license plate number, were released to the public, and the police appealed for assistance. Across Central Florida, people kept an eye out for the vehicle. Posters featuring Carla's photograph and descriptions of her jewelry, a pendant gifted by her colleagues for her 5th anniversary at work, and diamond earrings, were plastered around town. Simultaneously, a search party scoured the woods where Carla's car had been spotted. A group of Carla's female colleagues joined the police in the search, continuing until around 9:30 or 10 in the evening. Meanwhile, Leonard visited the store where Carla had made her last purchases, hoping to find security camera footage that might reveal if Carla was behaving strangely or being followed. However, their efforts hit a snag. The store had no security cameras. Although there was a payment terminal near the entrance, it offered no help. Detectives still managed to obtain important evidence. The store administrator provided them with a signed check. According to it, Carla spent $8.63 on groceries. The check revealed that she bought cherries, grapes, pita bread, and pretzels. This suggested she was planning to return to the office for a meeting, an odd assortment for someone intending to leave town. The time on the check was 12:12. Less than an hour later, Carla's car was seen speeding away from the edge of the woods. Detectives realized something had happened to her after she left the store and headed to her car. The search of the wooded area intensified, with many volunteers joining in. The news of Carla's disappearance terrified the residents of Orlando, especially those in College Park. When they learned from the police that Carla might have been abducted right from the store's parking lot, it horrified everyone. Such a thing shouldn't happen. No one knew who this person was or where they came from. It was frightening for Carla's colleagues to come to work each day in the same place where she had worked. People were not only afraid, but also sympathetic, and they tried to help the police. The phones at the sheriff's department rang constantly. While volunteers assisted the police in the search, they checked Jim's alibi. They discovered that he had been at work that day. The man had arrived early in the morning, left for lunch around 11, and returned approximately an hour later. There was no way Jim could have traveled from eastern Orlando to southern Orlando in that time. Meanwhile, volunteers combed the woods until late in the evening. People helped. This was normal. In such cities, mutual aid was common, and everyone wanted to be helpful. But after 2 days of searching, Carla Larson was still not found. Then early in the morning of June 12th, after 36 hours of searching, two of the woman's colleagues stumbled upon something. In an area that the police had already searched, they discovered Carla Larson's body covered with a towel. Her hair was in a braid, though it was disheveled, with strands falling out. It was summertime, so the body had undergone significant decomposition. Now the detectives faced the most unpleasant part of their job, which this time promised to be especially difficult. Jim, for the second time in his life, would have to learn about the murder of a loved one. When Carla was found, people were devastated. Everyone was grieving. It was a dark day for the city of Orlando. The community was shaken that a working woman had been abducted from a store parking lot in broad daylight during her lunch break. It shocked and saddened everyone deeply. Everyone feared for themselves. There was no way to foresee how close tragedy could strike. Meanwhile, the police cordoned off the area around the body and examined the scene. Carla's naked body was covered with a towel. The perpetrator had removed her clothes for some reason, perhaps to prevent her from escaping or with the intent to commit sexual assault. Along with Carla's clothes, almost all her jewelry was missing, except for her wedding ring. The woman wore the same pieces of jewelry, diamond earrings and a garnet ring. She also wore a pendant given to her by her colleagues to mark her 5-year work anniversary. The missing jewelry was valued at $5,500. Yet a question loomed over the police. How did two construction workers stumble upon the body after extensive, fruitless searches? Helicopters, foot patrols, and even mounted units had scoured the area, all failing to locate 31-year-old Carla Larson, who disappeared 48 hours prior, and the residents of Orlando, Florida, were in fear. The two volunteers, Chris Glanz and Jack Samport, discovered her remains in an area already deemed clear. Chris suggested a return trip to Jack to search once more. As they revisited the location where Carla's car had been spotted, a breeze carried a distinct odor. Chris, recalling an old hunting trick, lit and extinguished a match, following the smoke's direction. Against the wind, they traced the scent to its source, finding the body a mere 10 meters away. A plausible explanation, save for one complication. Chris had a past arrest for rape, a fact not lost on the detectives. When questioned about his whereabouts during Carla's disappearance, Chris provided an alibi. He was among the construction workers who saw Carla's car leaving the forest. Several colleagues corroborated his account. Jack also had an alibi. He claimed to have been at lunch during the time of the disappearance, a claim confirmed by coworkers. With their innocence seemingly confirmed, the investigation reached a standstill. The autopsy report offered little solace, as decomposition had obscured any potential leads. The only revelation was the cause of death: strangulation. Though the victim was found naked, detectives found no clear evidence of sexual assault. Had Carla been killed for mere jewelry or her car? Her transportation to the forest suggested premeditation. A crucial piece of evidence remained: the missing car. The detectives publicized the vehicle's description, hoping to elicit leads. 2 weeks after the discovery of the body, a call came from a neighboring police department with news of a car matching the description found burned in Cocoa Beach, nearly 100 kilometers from Orlando. Broward Sheriff's Office, led by Sheriff Akuga, dispatched officers to the scene. The vehicle description matched what detectives were looking for, though the call hadn't reached them immediately. They hurried to the location of the fire. However, a significant discrepancy surfaced. The burned-out car wasn't white like Carla's, but black. The fire inspector confirmed it. The black wasn't soot, but paint. It turned out the car had been spray painted. Originally, it was white. Who was trying to disguise the vehicle? And was it truly Carla's car? Detectives felt they had found it, but confirmation was needed. The vehicle was transported to the police garage for forensic examination. Carla's husband, Jim, told investigators about a custom radar detector he had installed in her car, a must-have for his fast-driving habits. Detectives found the spot on the dashboard where the device had been mounted. Despite the fire damage, it was evident the detector was missing. The police initiated a search for it. News of the burned car spread across Florida, sparking a wave of calls to the police. One woman, Crystal Powers, caught the detectives' attention with a story that deserved a look. Crystal recounted a trip to Orlando with her husband and children, after which he vanished without them. He eventually returned home, and soon after he arrived in a car matching the description of the Larsons' vehicle. The detectives traveled to Melbourne, Florida, roughly 32 kilometers south of where Carla's car was found, to speak with Crystal. She explained that she, her husband John, and their children had spent a weekend in Orlando, staying at a hotel across the street from where Carla was last seen. That night, Crystal and John had a fierce argument. He wanted intimacy, but she was not in the mood, and she said something that sent him into a rage. The argument escalated into a physical altercation. Crystal told police she broke free and locked herself in the bathroom. She then heard him snoring. She left with children in the another room. The next day, John was gone when Crystal and the children woke up. They waited at the hotel for his return, as they only had one car. John returned around 2 in the afternoon, looking as if he had just been in a bar fight. He was sweaty, disheveled, and had a bump on his forehead. John told Crystal to pack up the kids, get in the car, and leave. Crystal followed his instructions and left without John. She returned to her mother's house where her family was staying, and soon after, John arrived in a vehicle familiar to the detectives. It was a white SUV with tinted windows. Crystal hadn't seen the car before and was puzzled by its appearance. John claimed it was a rental, but a woman pointed out the radar detector, an unusual feature for rental vehicles. News reports of a missing woman in a burnt-out car sparked a realization in Crystal. She told detectives that the SUV had been parked near their home for a couple of days before John supposedly lent it to his friend, Nick Archer. The detectives were eager to speak with John Huggins, but Crystal revealed he had left her 3 days prior. According to her, he had left with her sister Lacey, and she was unsure of their current whereabouts or destination. The news, while unwelcome, was a crucial piece of information. John immediately became the prime suspect. Crystal's story seemed plausible, and the timing aligned with Carla's disappearance. Furthermore, John Huggins had a history riddled with crime, including armed robberies and bank heists. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and a search began across the entire East Coast. Meanwhile, the detectives decided to question Nick Archer. Upon arriving at Nick's residence, they discovered a significant detail. He lived approximately 400 meters from where the burnt car was discovered. The area between the two locations was filled with commercial buildings and a patch of neglected shrubbery. Nick's girlfriend Amanda answered the door, stating that he wasn't home. The detectives decided to question her. Amanda revealed that John Huggins had driven the white SUV to their home. She recalled being annoyed at John and Nick because the SUV was parked in her parking spot. The detectives mentioned to Maid that they would return to speak with Nick. Just then, the long-awaited call arrived. They learned that John had been apprehended by Maryland State Police, prompting their immediate departure. A dispute between John Huggins and his sister Crystal had led police to her home. It was discovered that arrest warrants for robberies in Florida were outstanding for John. But there was more. He had a weapon, a pellet gun resembling a real firearm. Although non-lethal, it raised questions for the detectives. John admitted being in Varlanado on the day of Carla's disappearance, but swore he was not involved in her murder. He also denied ever driving a white SUV. The detectives then revealed that his wife had already told them about the white vehicle. John responded with an astonishing claim. He insisted Crystal was insane and fabricating the story to get rid of him, suggesting she was romantically obsessed with him and wanted to eliminate him from her life. Could it be that Crystal and Nick were framing an innocent John? Eager to learn the truth, the police had John extradited back to Florida to face robbery charges, and the detectives returned to Nick. But when he opened the door, they were stunned. The Orlando police now had two suspects, John Huggins and Nick Archer, who had been seen with Carla Larson's car. When the detectives finally saw Nick, they were shocked to see that he looked exactly like the man driving Carla's car. Nick stated firmly that he had never driven an SUV, nor had he ever been to Orlando on the day the crime occurred. According to Nick, John had arrived in such a vehicle and requested to leave it at Nick's place. Nick had inquired about the SUV's origin, to which John had replied that he had rented it. However, suspicion arose in Nick's mind when he noticed a radar detector on the dashboard. Nick claimed that John returned approximately 7 days later to retrieve the vehicle. Nick insisted he had shared all he knew. Just as the detectives were about to depart, Nick volunteered that he had discovered the radar detector from John's vehicle in his yard. Nick claimed he had initially assumed John had left the device as a gift. He kept it for a few days but grew uneasy, suspecting the vehicle might be stolen and wanting no involvement. Therefore, he discarded the device on his property. Nick willingly handed the radar detector over to the detectives. By tracing its serial number, they confirmed it had indeed been installed in Carla's car. This marked the first tangible evidence placing Carla's vehicle in proximity to Nick's residence. But was Nick being deceptive, or was he merely misled? The detectives investigated John's claims of a secret affair between Nick and Crystal and their alleged conspiracy against him. However, interviews with Nick, Crystal, Amando, and others failed to corroborate this version of events. The detectives discovered a strong dislike between the two initial suspects, bordering on mutual irritation. The history of grievances made a secret affair seem improbable, yet Nick remained a person of interest. His alibi was airtight. His supervisor and timesheets placed him miles away, leading a landscaping crew at the time of the murder. Crystal was next to be eliminated, confirmed to have been at a hotel and then at home with her children throughout the day. That left only John Huggins, but the police needed solid evidence before making an arrest. The fate of Carla's jewelry, diamond earrings, a garnet ring, a chain, and a pendant remained a mystery. Just as the search threatened to stall, a breakthrough came in the form of a call from Linda, Crystal's mother. She had found Carla's jewelry inside a loose electrical junction box. This was the missing piece. The jewelry became crucial evidence, the foundation for John's arrest for Carla's murder. Though a car with a radar detector connected John to the crime, this find was the linchpin. On May 28, 1998, John Huggins was charged with the murder of Carla Larson, as well as auto theft, kidnapping, and robbery. For Jim, the arrest was a step toward justice. The trial commenced on January 25, 1999. John pleaded not guilty, claiming Crystal had framed him. However, the prosecution presented a compelling narrative of the tragic events of that day in Carla Larson's life. Detectives theorized that John, needing to vent after an argument with his wife, sought a victim for robbery. Spotting Carla Larson in a parking lot, he saw her as an easy target and forced her into her own vehicle. The police believed Huggins threatened her with a gun he had previously stolen. Under duress, Carla was driven to a nearby wooded area, stripped of her clothes and jewelry. An attempt at sexual assault failed, triggering a violent rage. In his fury, John strangled Carla, then covered her body with a beach towel. Though circumstantial, the evidence was compelling. Many of the best cases were built on such evidence. The prosecution presented a formidable case, yet the jury's verdict held paramount importance. Ultimately, the jurors reached a decision. By a margin of 8-4, the jury recommended the death penalty for John Huggins. In June of 1999, John Huggins was convicted and sentenced to death. He remains on death row, continuing to file appeals. With justice served, the residents of Orlando finally began to heal from the tragedy. Only Jim Larson would never escape the pain of losing two cherished loved ones. Still, he persevered for the sake of their young daughter, Jessica.